Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of You, Me, Empathy. My name is Known Wells. This is episode 182 on unexpected acts of altruism, a rare disease, and curing the incurable with Miguel Sancho. Miguel is the author of the new book, More Than You Can Handle, A Rare Disease, A Family in Crisis, and the Cutting-Edge Medicine That Cured the Incurable. It's wonderful, the book. This conversation was wonderful. I was so grateful to chat with Miguel. We talk about the cultural and psychological drive to create binaries in a non-binary world, the role of religion in our struggle and search, the unexpected acts of love and altruism that come with unexpected hardship, and we get into Miguel's new book, which is about or inspired by his son, who was diagnosed with CGD, or chronic granulomatous. I can't even say that word. I'm just going to keep going. Disease, a very rare hereditary immune deficiency disease. And we get into his experience with dealing with that and the impact that had on his own mental health and his family and his marriage. And it's a wonderful book, very inspiring, really holds a lot of, it makes me think about the wisdom and resilience of children and the fact that we really need to listen to them more. Really wonderful book, really wonderful conversation with Miguel. But before we get into that, please, if you can, I do this show every week. It's one of my weekly joys. I love it. I want to keep doing it forever. And I also need your help. So if you'd like to support me and the work I do, please leave ratings and reviews for this show in Apple Podcasts. Please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/feelyhuman. I get bonus episodes every month and whatnot. Check that out at patreon.com/feelyhuman if you want to support me on an ongoing basis. And if you want to support my small business, Feely Human, please do. There's a new mug in the shop called Sitting With My Feelings. It's adorable. I recommend you check it out. You can sit and sip with your feelings if you go to feelyhuman.co/shop. feelyhuman.co is also where you get the show notes for every episode of this podcast at feelyhuman.co/episodes. Check that out there. The other thing I wanted to mention is this Wednesday, in a couple of days, June 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, is our very own Build Your Seasonal Self-Care Survival Kit online workshop led by my friend and previous guest of this show, Rebecca Haas. It's a 90-minute workshop. We're going to get deep into self-care and what that means for you. I know for myself, I've been struggling with self-care and what that means, and I hope that this workshop will help you. It's $15. It's 90 minutes, June 9th, 10 a.m. Pacific time. Hope to see you there. There are plenty of spots left, so if you can, please check it out. If you go to feelyhuman.co and click the banner at the top, it's called Build Your Seasonal Self-Care Survival Kit. And again, it's this Wednesday, June 9th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Hope to see you there. I will be there along with Rebecca and others, so hope to see you there. The last thing I will say is that I appreciate you. I appreciate you listening, truly. If you're listening to these intros, I do appreciate that you do. And I thank you for listening. I thank you for being a part of the Feel the Human Collective and the community. I hope you are leading with your heart and feeling your feelings, and know that you're not alone, and that it's okay sometimes to struggle and be in pain. That is part of the rich tapestry of the human experience, right? So thank you for being here, and thank you for listening to this episode 182 on unexpected acts of altruism, a rare disease, and curing the incurable with Miguel Sancho.
La 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 la, you, me, empathy, yeah, la la la.
Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight, so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, I'm grateful to be here with Emmy Award-winning news and documentary TV producer, father to the bright, resilient, courageous light that is Sebastian, and author of the new book, More Than You Can Handle. It's Miguel Sancho. Hello, Miguel.
Hello. How are you? And hello to your listeners. Thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I'm so grateful to have you here to talk about your book, More Than You Can Handle, to talk about feelings and hardship and all of the beauty that is the rich tapestry of the human experience.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah.
I feel somewhat qualified to participate in this conversation.
We're all a little bit somewhat qualified and somewhat not qualified. Before we get to your story, Miguel, we always start with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling?
Today, I am feeling quite good. I am with people that I've known for a long time, who I feel completely comfortable around. I've gone on a little bit of a retreat away from
Nice.
My job and my family, and it's nothing spectacular, but it is safe and quiet. And I've kind of, I guess just coincidentally, in the scheduling of this podcast, taken a little time to kind of try to do some work on myself and do some resetting and rewiring and, kind of rebalancing.
That's lovely. It's, you being in the world of TV and producing and production, like there's a pressure to like be on, right? Constantly sort of be moving forward, making progress. And I think there's value to that, but I also think there's some more rest and pausing we need to do, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I'm very fortunate and very blessed to have a job that is, creative and sometimes inspiring, and gives me an opportunity to kind of flex different muscles. But it is a job, and I think everybody who has a job knows what that means. You have deadlines, you have budgets, you have supervisors. I'm used to all of that. I also have to, collaborate and manage people, and I'd be the first to tell you that that's not my first kind of instinct or kind of natural skill. I have other skills, but kind of telling people what to do is not something I kind of relish. So, that always takes a certain degree of focus and concentration and delicacy and empathy. And I try, but I don't always succeed at that part of it. So, that's something I'm constantly, reminding myself, being reminded by others.
Yeah.
It's something that is kind of a continuous process for me. So yeah, it's good to, and I think also a lot of people can relate to this. In this country in particular, we have a tendency to identify with our jobs. And we think that, our source of meaning, our source of purpose, our source of status, our self-worth is designated so much by what it is you do for a living and how well you do it and how well you're compensated for it. And so in this weekend in particular, it's just nice to get away from people not get away from people, but get away from that environment and be around people is what I'm trying to say, who have known me and loved me and accepted me way before I had any kind of job or, any kind of position in the work world, and are willing to kind of embrace me and not just accept me for who I am and accept my faults as giving me license to wallow in my imperfections, but to kind of help me grow and kind of walk with me.
Yeah. Those are the people we need. I think of like work and a lot of these like big systems at play as just like the neutral pieces in our lives, right? We look at work as maybe a value, but I like to think of it as a neutral force, and it's kind of what we bring to it, how we operate within this neutral space, because it could be something that can be toxic for us. It can be something that could be a great boon for our health and self-actualization, but it's what we bring to it, right?
Sure. I mean, work, whether you're in a .com startup or a production company or the army, right? Large groups of people are kind of required to do big things. And if you're interested in doing bigger things, you need to be able to do that. And we obviously live in a world where things are bought and sold. So, if you're going to participate in this economy, and you need to, produce, you don't have infinite, pools of capital from other sources. You need to be able to do this. And I think for most people, aspects of it come naturally and other aspects of it don't. So the name of the game is just constantly kind of be mindful enough and be self-aware enough to know what your strengths and weaknesses are, and try to always check in and improve to the degree that you can, and at the same time while trying to balance everything. I mean, it's an interesting thing to juggle. Yeah,
it is. So you mentioned right now you're creating some space for yourself to rest and recoup and rejuvenate. What are for you specifically? What are some things that help you do that? Obviously, getting out of moving, getting to another sort of location. But what are some specific, maybe self-care practices that help you?
Yeah. So I'm happy to answer that question. Again, I just have to put in the disclaimer that I'm not so excellent a practitioner or I don't have such a great degree of discipline that I'm in a position to call myself an authority on anything of this nature. I'm still very much a searcher. But what I have found that helps, there's a variety of things that help. I do meditate. I try to be conscientious enough about it to do it a few times a week at least. But sometimes I let that slide, and I can quite clearly detect the slippage. So I've been doing a fair amount of that. I tried to do. Again, none of this is revelatory, right? This has all been said 1,000 times by other people, but I do try to exercise to a certain degree. Everything you read about exercise being kind of a good way to, kind of cleanse yourself and cleanse your mind of some of its contaminants is completely true. For me, I find also, and I wrote about this in the book, that whatever problems I'm having, and this is not just my opinion, this has been explained to me quite clearly and clinically by people with letters after their names. Whatever problems I'm having, if I'm not sleeping properly, you just enter a downward spiral very easily. Sleep is a way of scrubbing the brain of some of its toxins. That's not a metaphor. That actually is a biochemical reality. And if I'm not sleeping properly, I will notice that. So, by any means necessary, and you don't have to be judgmental about what it takes for you to get to sleep. But for me, that's another thing. So that's one of the things that I'm doing this weekend is trying to really reset my sleep clock so that I can
Nice.
get back on that. So that's just some of it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a couple of things I think of when you say that. First, like, yes, we're all human, Miguel. I appreciate the disclaimer, but you don't need to say it. Like, we're all aware and cognizant. I hope so. Like, none of us are experts. Like, I don't think there's really such a thing. And I think the place of when we, this is my perspective, but I feel like when we get to a place, maybe someone gets to a place where they say, I know it all, like that's problematic. That's not a place, right? Like I think the point is the searching.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So just to give you that and to like calm your anxieties, like that is the point and we're all there.
Sure. I guess I just want to acknowledge the fact that, like, take a subject like meditation, right? There are people who have devoted their lives to it, not just the practice,
sure,
study and the whole thing. And, they have things worth listening to. Maybe not everything. I mean, I'm very much kind of a cafeteria consumer of every, philosophy and every practice, just pick what works for you and go with it. And also I think, some of my hesitancy has to do with the fact that I wrote a book that is a story, and the way at least Western storytelling is done kind of archetypically is there's a protagonist who starts out in position A and has an experience, and by the end of it, they arrive someplace. They've been
the hero's journey.
The hero's journey, and they come back with the sacred wisdom to share. And I had an experience, and I learned some stuff from it, and I'm happy to share it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I've been transformed completely and finally, and I'm incapable of backsliding, and I'm above, further criticism or further opportunities to learn. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think like the thing that I've been trying to challenge myself with, and it's been very helpful, and maybe it could be helpful for you and the listeners, is like instead of saying but, we say and, right? Mm-hmm. Allowing for the space of like, hey, I had this profound experience. It was hard. My family was impacted. I was impacted by it. I learned some things. And at the same time, people have it worse. Maybe people have more, quote unquote, more profound gleanings, whatever. Like both of those truths can exist at once, right?
It's a very good point. I noticed actually in some of the first drafts of my book and also in a lot of my writing for television, I do have a tendency to start sentences with but. So I should take note of that and do a little inventory on that and see if it would work better if I said and instead of but more often.
Well, I think I'm wondering what your thoughts are about this, because I think that but and our use of that but collectively as a society is related to capitalism. It's related to competition. It's related to this societal need to pit things against one another, right?
Yeah.
This versus that, good versus bad, et cetera, et cetera. And our brains, like we naturally like start to think in those terms because it's what we're seeing. It's what we're taking in, So I think that's why it's hard to use the and remember that like we contain multitudes. Remember that like all truths exist, simultaneously, all that stuff.
That's really well said. And I think not to get too esoteric, but I agree. There's this psychological and cultural pull towards binaries and oppositions and conflicts that in many ways are the building blocks of the drama and the tension that kind of captivate our interest. So there's, obviously, entertainment value in that, and perhaps educational value in that kind of thinking. It makes certain stories easy to access, but in a bigger sense, it might be not just a simplification, but its own form of toxicity.
Yeah. One of the, I mean, I want to touch on like how you got to the point where you wrote this book, but like one of those binaries that I saw pop up in your book, More Than You Can Handle, is the and maybe this is unfair, but like the pitting against of like your wife's sort of dip into Christianity, and then you're sort of like holding on to like the empiricism, the science. And I thought, like, I've been there myself. I think I am still there in some regards, right? And we'll set some more context in a bit for the listeners, but I'm wondering where you're at with that stuff now.
Specifically with the ongoing kind of tension, both in my mind and in my marriage, between the Christianity,
those two things.
Yeah. So I think I think my wife and I, are in a pretty good space with that for a number of reasons. One of which is that one of the things that I did learn, or at least I did kind of expand my understanding of, was about the role of religion in people's struggles and people's search for strength for their own journey. And that sounds new agey and soft, but what I'm trying to say is that for a long time in my life, I understood that, and I accepted the fact that people's religious practice was kind of good ethical teaching. It was good just prima facie to be biblically literate, the same way it's good to be literate in Shakespeare or whatever kind of foundational cultural texts you think are important. I think going to church, and I've also going to church, is just a good practice for families anyway, because it's an hour away from screens. And it's an hour where kids aren't kind of constantly being entertained and catered to.
Yeah.
There's a kind of Spartanist thing to that I think is good. But a large part of me, and I wasn't strident about this, but a fair amount of part of me thought that there was quite a bit of superstition involved. And there was a kind of unnuanced understanding of the world that was, trying to explain things in ways that really didn't stand up to much scrutiny, et cetera, et cetera. So there was, I guess, an inherently condescending attitude I had to a lot of people who were more serious about religion than I was. I think my wife went the other way. She, had been kind of on the fence about religion. She'd experienced 10 different relationships with it in the course of her life. But when this crisis hit us, which is, our son's health crisis, that is kind of the initiating action for the whole book, she found herself gravitating much more in that direction. And it was supremely annoying to me at some points. And it was hard for me to relate to her at some times. But the fact of the matter is that is something that gave her the strength to not just kind of persevere and endure, not just the strength to cede control over the situation and the need for control over situations, but also this wonderful gift that a lot of religions, I think, present, Christianity in particular, of a really wonderful and helpful, in many ways beautiful way of understanding suffering, and understanding that suffering isn't just something to be endured or something to be ignored in a kind of stoic understanding of it, but something that can be actually embraced as something that can serve a higher purpose, something that can help you adjust perspective, reorient priorities, reorient your values, and can be in its own way a beautiful experience.
Yeah. I love that. And thank you for sharing that. I because you hear again and again stories of people going through hard times, going through hardship, going through stress and trauma, And I think it's so human to want to find meaning, right? Find meaning in our hardships, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's such a human desire. I think it's it can come from a place of wanting to control, right? And I think there is a lot of value in allowing things to be what they are and letting go. However, religion or community, it can also be, as you point out, it can be this thing that brings this system of connection, right, and community that I think is like one of the main takeaways from reading your book is like this tremendous value of the collective, the tremendous value of like the connection we have with others. Like you talk about like the beautiful people that you've experienced over the course of these 4+ years with your son Sebastian, the nurses, the doctors, various charities and stuff, and it's just like you couldn't have done it without them. And it's just like, for me, it's just like that gives me hope. That's inspiring. That reminds me of like we're not like these lone wolves, like right? We're together.
Sure. The world will disappoint you, of course, right? Other people will disappoint you. Your family disappoints you. Your friends can disappoint you. You can disappoint yourself. I've certainly disappointed myself many times. So it's very easy to slip into kind of a baseline equilibrium position of cynicism and alienation and kind of an atomized consciousness where you think ultimately it's every man for himself.
Yeah.
And then if you are both cursed and blessed to have an experience like we had, and you see not just the kind of reflexive, sincere, but reflexive outpourings of sympathy and people saying, if there's anything we can do, but you actually see people taking their own initiative to go above and beyond and, put their priorities aside to make you a priority, even though they're not necessarily obligated to. A lot of these people, it's not like were related to them.
Right.
Or we were that we hadn't earned it. In other words,
right.
Some of this was just pure, spontaneous, and unexpected acts of altruism and love that just touches you and keeps me, going. Whenever you get kind of down on humanity. So yes, we were very fortunate to experience that, and it's like I said, it's just a wonderful gift.
One of the things I've learned about empathy as I've studied it and thought about it and talked about it and led workshops about it is this idea that we as humans can still be in an empathetic place and can still apply empathy to others, even if we haven't had the same exact experience, right? Like we can still relate to the fact that like this person is going through hard times. I've been through hard times, right? We can still get there. It takes more work, it takes more practice, but like hearing your story and seeing all that altruism, seeing all these people pop up, is a sign that empathy can be this sort of. It's not just about the shoes that we put ourselves in. It's a lot more, I think.
Yeah, and I think the opportunities for empathy abound. Certainly, it's something that I need to constantly work on to try to improve. And one of the things that is really helpful for me is to remind myself of some of these super altruists that you see in the course of some of these experiences. I'm going to use an example. Some of the nurses that we met and bonded with in the pediatric bone marrow transplant unit at Duke University Hospital, which again, we're kind of getting ahead of things in the story, but that's, where a lot of this happened. We're talking about nurses who very easily could, you can do any number of things once you get, your nurse certification. And unlike, say, an ER nurse, which is one kind of experience, and of course, ER nurses are great, the nurses in a pediatric bone marrow transplant unit have specifically decided they want to be in a place where there's going to be intense bonding with the patients, right? You're not just kind of checking with them and moving them on to the next space in a conveyor belt. They want to bond and have this intimate emotional connection with these patients who very well might not make it. There's plenty of success stories. They do great work there, but not every kid makes it. And to intentionally devote your life to that kind of environment is just a beautiful thing. And it's an example for me.
Yeah, it is a beautiful thing. Yeah, and that's a great example. So let's set the context. So
Sure.
your son Sebastian was born healthy and then develops a what's called chronic. Can you? I don't even know how to pronounce the word. Chronic granulomatous disease.
Yeah. So one of the things you'll find in the rare disease community is that many of the diseases have unpronounceable, incomprehensible names, and that just makes it that much harder to relate. Yeah. So my son, we found this out months after he was born, but he inherited a mutation on his X chromosome that made it such that a very important cell in the immune system, and we're all getting familiar with the immune system these days, a very important cell in his immune system called a neutrophil was being produced in the proper quantities, but it was not functioning. It was kind of switched off, an important function of it.
Right.
As a result, when he and other patients with this condition are exposed to certain kinds of bacteria and fungus, that people with healthy immune systems can fight off with no problem, he can't. And what happens is the cells, these neutrophils, go to the site of infection and they try to do their thing, but they don't. So the immune system keeps sending more cells, and you get these buildup of cells that have this unpronounceable name called a granuloma. And so the disease is called chronic granulomatous disease. But basically it means that he can't fight off a lot of bacteria and fungal infections. And as a result, he didn't have to live in like the stereotypical boy in the bubble thing. They have, there's ways to treat it and maintain and live with the condition, and they're improving all the time, of course. But it does mean that you're going to have significant impairments to both the quality and the quantity of your life. There's a lot of environmental restrictions you have to obey. There's constant medications. There's a constant likelihood of serious infection that can be lethal. And in his particular case, he had the most extreme, the most serious variant of the disease, if you will. And so we were confronted with the idea of either trying to live with the disease and give him a quote-unquote normal life to the degree that we could, while facing the statistical reality that there was a good chance he wasn't going to live into his 20s. Or the other realistic option was to roll the dice with the one known curative treatment, which was itself continues to be one of the most arduous, risky, and lengthy medical procedures you can undertake, which is a stem cell transplant, commonly known as a bone marrow transplant, and which is de facto an immune system transplant. You blow out the existing immune system with chemotherapy. You infuse the patient with donor cells that have been hopefully adequately matched so that they'll engraft. And then once that happens, you build up an immune system from scratch while trying to avoid a rather breathtakingly large number of potential setbacks and complications that can ultimately be as devastating as the disease itself.
Yeah.
So that was our dilemma.
Quite the dilemma. I mean, I'm so like it's like one of those books where I'm just like, well, it's in the subtitle, Sebastian is alive and well, and yet I still wanted to, be like Harry in When Harry Met Sally and like jump to the end and read the end before I started the book, right? Because it's such the ups and downs that you and your wife and your family experience is just hard. It's hard. It's so challenging and so difficult. And I am so grateful that Sebastian is here and with us. But I will say, like, gosh, I I mean, my heart goes out to you for having to go through all of that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I always have to say that there are plenty of, and we met them and we saw them. There's plenty of kids with more serious conditions, plenty of kids who have worse outcomes, plenty of kids who have much less hope of an actual, true light at the end of the tunnel, a true curative treatment that can make it seem in many ways that the disease never happened. But yes, it was devastating, and it was particularly devastating to me because, and I'm not proud to say this, I had a very fortunate 41 years before this befell us. I wasn't born rich, but both my parents were educators. I never felt like I was deprived of anything. I never felt unsafe. I never felt neglected. I was blessed with an exquisite education. And I never had one of these things that we cover in the news all the time. People with, steady lives, stable lives who believe that their future is going to be on a predictable trajectory, and then some random, unexpected thing tragically upends everything. There's plenty of people that sometimes it's violent crime, sometimes it's massive economic hardship, wars happen, terrorist attack happens, all these things, and I covered all that stuff, and I was interested and I was compassionate to people whose stories I was telling, but none of that ever kind of fortified me for the eventuality of something like that happening to me. So when it did happen, I simply did not have either the character or the tools or the skills or the education, whatever you want to call it, to kind of perform heroically and nobly and in this saintly manner in which many people do rise to the occasion. I don't mean to mock them or discredit them or cast doubt on these stories you hear all the time. But I wasn't one of them. I stumbled. I fell apart. I made things worse in certain degrees to the point that, in the wake of the diagnosis, I managed to kind of send my marriage on the rocks, and we were seriously talking about getting divorced, and it every aspect of my life essentially, took a hit, big or small, and ultimately that's what made me realize, I needed to start doing the work on myself. Otherwise, catastrophe was really within reach.
Yeah. Well, it's what I like so much about the book. Obviously you have this positive ending where, Sebastian, he gets the transplant, and it's beautiful, but like everything in between is a really profoundly vulnerable telling of like what it looks like to be in a marriage, in a family, just as a human, as a fallible human in the course of dealing with things that we haven't dealt with before, in the course of dealing with change and hardship. And I so appreciate that it illuminates the very human parts of like, man, this fucking sucks, or man, like this part I'm struggling at, and that's okay, right? Like I so appreciated those ups and downs.
Yeah. Well, as a journalist, I spent years kind of focusing my powers of critique, my powers of judgment and denunciation on other people's foibles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they weren't always undeserved. People who'd committed crimes, people who'd committed frauds, people who had, done all sorts of, I would say, objectively objectionable things.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I realized in the course of this process, and certainly when I thought about writing a book, was, how would it play out if I decided to try that exercise on myself? How would it work if I trained those powers of critique and denunciation on my own behavior, on my own foibles, on my own imperfections? To a certain degree, and again, I don't want to make it seem like I'm the world's most pious Christian, but I do really enjoy and recommend the Confessions of St. Augustine, St. Augustine, I just said that incorrectly, St. Augustine, who kind of launched the whole memoir craze, 1600 years ago.
Hmm.
You know, the kind of the confessions mode of writing and self-critique is something that I found helpful. And when I launched into it, I wanted to really make sure that I was candid. There are certain things I papered over rather, just because I didn't want my kids to be supremely embarrassed. But for the most part, I did try to kind of really relate what it's like when you're kind of called upon to rise to an occasion, and it's a struggle just to rise to a base level of adequacy.
Yeah. And I think we need more of it. From you, from all of us, like, because I do think, speaking of the systems at play earlier, is
Mm-hmm.
in the space of stories, right? Stories in general, right? There is a lot of we'll call it toxic positivity, call it like silver lining syndrome, call it, there are those things happen. Certainly, I mentioned we make meaning out of hardship earlier, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we need the humanity, like we need the authenticity, like I need, as a human, need to read your book and see that, like, man, you struggled. You had brights and you dark and the darks, right? And you showed me your humanity, and that allows me in. Because otherwise, I think we get false senses of like what it means to go through stuff, and
Yeah.
that could be damaging, I think.
Yeah. I mean, books these days a lot of people have every book's kind of supposed to be a how-to book, right? Every book,
Sure.
there's a saying that every memoir is obligated to be something of a self-help book. Um, so, and I'd like to think that there's something of value. I think there's something of value to learning about the experience. I'm not sure there's, my nuggets of wisdom, deserve front and center space, but it's difficult, I mean, look, my particular thing is that when this happened, it kind of stripped away a lot of the scaffolding that was able to kind of sustain me in the various aspects of my life, domestic and professional and what have you. And it kind of melted melted me down and defoliated me to the point where, a lot of the ugliness was not able to be camouflaged or paper over or swept under a rug, right? So,
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, so I got depressed. Okay. I succumbed to some rather crippling anxiety. And for some people who have these issues, they're reflected in relatively socially acceptable or sympathy generating symptoms. They can't get out of bed, or
Yeah.
they cry uncontrollably. And I did my fair share of that. But also, I had and continue to have this, unfortunate symptom of irritability, right? Um, I can be a dick, for lack of a better word. I can kind of cover up my insecurities or my pain by, weaponizing my erudition and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, trying to make myself feel better by feeling bigger, by being right in certain arguments, and kind of demonstrating I'm right or pointing out other people's shortcomings. It's not good, and it makes me difficult to be around sometimes. So that's part of what I had to confront and still confront. So that's what led me to kind of explore and go on this kind of quest to find some sort of multifaceted program that, when and only when it's being followed properly, can kind of keep that stuff in check. Because whether or not you believe in heaven and hell, I firmly believe that you can make hell exist on earth, and
Sure.
you can create it around you for yourself and for the people around you. That door is always open. And for me, at least, it takes concerted effort, sometimes exhausting effort, to make sure that I'm not walking in that direction.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. It's okay. Like, I think we as humans, we still struggle with the feelings part of this, the quote unquote negative aspects of depression or anxiety. These things are very universally felt and experienced. I have clinical depression myself, so I experience these things quite frequently. What I've learned, and maybe you can speak to this, is like there's a lot of suffering in resisting these things, right? So what I've learned, like early on in my depression, there was a lot of anger and irritability. Those are often like the first sort of feelings we feel when we're maybe resisting a thing that we don't want to like get into, because everything else seems so fucking overwhelming. And you were in one of the most, I mean, in my perspective, one of the more overwhelming experiences a person can have, which is the love of my life, my son, one of my, children is experiencing suffering and pain. Like, that's the job of the parent, is to protect and to love their child. Right. And that's been not stripped of you, but like that's been made much more complex. Right. So like, it's so understandable that you'd have this depression and anxiety and irritability and anger. Like those are the first places that I would go.
Yeah, I mean, we all know it's not a it's not a just universe, but there are certain injustices that are just so infuriating, right? And
Yeah.
the completely undeserved suffering of the innocent is right up there, and there's very little that's more innocent than a newborn child. So yes, it was profoundly infuriating, and I do believe that I think Aristotle says that the just man has to get angry at injustice. But that said, anger is very easy to get out of control. It's a very, very difficult genie to contain once you let it out of the bottle.
Yeah.
And that was a problem for me. So yeah, at a certain point, when my wife was talking about getting separated, I started talking to friends. I started just starting to do the work. And, I went to my first meditation session. I started seeing therapists, went to a couples therapist at one point. At a certain point, of course, I was convinced that, just a few months of meditating had solved everything, but that wasn't the case by any means. And when we had another setback, it set me back. And I was told in no uncertain terms, if you want to call it an ultimatum, you can call it that, by my wife, that I needed to go on medication. And I'll tell you, I don't know why I resisted it for so long. I had done recreational drugs since I was 15. Obviously, I think drugs can be bad. Addiction is not good. But philosophically, I believe in intoxication experience. So, in the right circumstances, in the right moderation. So why I was, for putting something in my body that would kind of make my happy brain happier, but was against putting something in my body that would make my unhappy brain less unhappy, was a profound cognitive, dissonance on my part, a logical failure. I think part of it might have been, ego, a certain kind of macho approach to mental health.
Yeah.
my identity, like who I think I am, where, I'm not the most handsome guy in the world. I'm not a great athlete. What I do, the way I get by in this world is largely by what I think and what I say and what I write. So the idea that particular thing was not functioning properly was a particularly, tough blow to the ego.
It's scary.
Yeah, it's scary. So it took me a while to embrace it. And even after I embraced it, it took me a while to kind of get it right.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, when I started feeling better, I was like, well, I don't take Pepto-Bismol after I stop having diarrhea. Why would I continue taking antidepressant medications if I'm feeling better?
Yep.
And don't do that. I'm not a doctor, but I advise people not to go off their meds just because
cold turkey.
Yeah, don't go cold turkey.
Yep. Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. Medication has been crucial for me in my journey, and I think we can all relate to the anxiety of putting something into your body, and the fact remains is that there is still so much mystery when it comes to mental health. There's still mental illness. I have a brother who has schizoaffective disorder. The psycho sort of based disorders, like there's still so much that's unknown, and that's a scary thing, right? And you're kind of giving yourself over to systems at play that feel like sometimes they're just we're guinea pigs, or they're just kind of figuring it out, and that feels scary, but I think a lot of this, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about even rare diseases like Sebastian has. There is I find a lot of letting go that we need to do, and allowing for the mystery. I mean, yes, we can do our work in research and find some grounding and anchoring in religion or in science and all of the above, right? But there's also I think always going to be an allowing for mystery, don't you think?
Yeah. And you can take a kind of an exploratory or an expeditious attitude towards mental health, right? It's not all about eating your vegetables, metaphorically speaking.
Yeah.
I will volunteer that in the last couple of years I've explored taking mushrooms, psilocybin, hallucinogenic mushrooms.
Hey, me too, buddy.
In a couple moderate doses. And when I was, a teenager, I did them, for fun to, go party and do whatever, go to a Grateful Dead show or go to the Boston Aquarium or just trip out,
Sure.
But now when I do them, and again, it's been, I think, twice in the last 2.5 years, it's really much more along the lines of doing it in a therapeutic setting, attempting to kind of do some rewiring, some resetting, some buffer clearing. And it's awesome, and it's beautiful. It can be scary. And the benefits are, possibly, unknown until we do some sort of long-term longitudinal studies, but people are doing them. And I have nothing bad to say about it. I'm not recommending that everybody go have a handful of mushrooms and try to drive a school bus, but under the right circumstances, setting the whole thing, I have found it to be a helpful and very beautiful experience in certain regards.
Yeah, same. This past year and a half, I've had 2 sort of trip doses experiences with the intention of this being work, this being emotional work, this being a part of the seeking and the searching that I want to continue doing, right? Mm-hmm. And then also to see if it has long-term effects on my depression and things like that. I've been doing microdosing as well as sort of part of that experiment. And yeah, I'm with you. It's been very profound. It's been challenging in a lot of ways, and I think it has allowed me to look at the world in a more context of like just having more perspective and allowing things to be more and really speaking to what we're talking about here, allowing for things to not be so controlled
Certainly.
and not be so led by ego or led by insecurities, and really finding a lot more confidence in myself, which has been great.
I'm happy to hear that. That's so wonderful.
Yeah.
Not to probe too deeply. It's personal stuff, but do you?
No, I don't care.
Do you microdose every 4 days for a number of months, or how have you looked in your approach to that?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So the past about 4 months, I've been doing about 0.2 grams of a variety called penis envy. It's very silly to say, but that's the variety. Every 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have found that things are a little brighter. Things are, as my buddy David says, you're kind of slightly nudged in the right direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're functional?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. There are certain moments where, certain days where I do take it, and maybe it's because I have food in my system or not, or whatever, where it's a little bit more than I should be doing on a day that I have to work. It's maybe a little distracting,
right?
But for the most part, it seems I have a higher threshold based on the experiences I've had with other people I've done mushrooms with.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I'm fully committed to the belief that people should try whatever works for them. And if it, feel free to hopscotch around. For a long time, like I mentioned, when I tried meditation and it was helping me significantly, but not enough, frankly. And I resolved to try an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medication. I almost felt like I was like cheating on a girlfriend, that I was somehow being disloyal to the practice. And as anybody who knows anything about the current state of the meditation community, there is something of a evangelical aspect to it, right?
Yep.
We want to spread the word, and we want to make the world a better place. And the more people who do this, and the more each person who does it, the better. I felt that I was somehow deviating from the mission, and I'm very happy to say that I spoke to people who I do consider thought leaders in the field, people who've done a lot more, written very good books about it, and they said, no, whatever works. You don't have to feel that that you're failing just because you're availing yourself of some other modality of self-help.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. We do this thing as humans where, or I'll just speak to myself. Like, yeah, we want to do it right, quote unquote, right? We want to get we want to squeeze every ounce of like thing out of this practice, because like that is what we envision. We envision the guy or the gal like levitating in, lotus pose, and they're like, they're enlightened, right? But the reality is, we're all unique, right? No one way is the right way, and sometimes, and most times, it takes just a combination of a lot of things.
Sure. Yeah. And at any given time, I have like 4 or 5 different kind of stools of my legs to the stool of my program, and as long as I'm doing 2 or 3 of them, I feel like I'm doing what I need to do. Sometimes I shift up, and sometimes I don't do enough. I need to, I can certainly tell when I'm not doing enough. The signs are all around.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
some constellation of these things, and some degree of commitment make a huge difference for me.
Yeah. So Miguel, how is Sebastian doing today? And how old is he at this point?
He is going to turn 9 in 2 weeks.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is amazing. We're so blessed. And whenever I think about him, I think about all the other patients who came before him. You talked about, when we're taking any given medication, that you can sometimes feel like a guinea pig.
Yep.
Because, it's an ongoing experiment with so many unknowns. And that's all true. But I would invite people to consider that's a beautiful thing in many ways. You are, I think back to, especially with a procedure like a bone marrow transplant, right? The first patients, when they first tried this, 50 years ago, the fatality rates in the procedure were so high that if they tried it these days, the procedure would be outlawed, given the rules they have now on, human experimentation. And all the patients who don't have optimal outcomes, all the patients who have to, suffer and sacrifice in order for us to get enough data to know what works.
Yeah.
So we're all kind of standing on a mountain built by those sacrifices. And, you can criticize pharmaceutical companies. I'm not saying they're beyond criticism. But, when I take a medicine or when my son takes a medicine, I often do reflect on, all the people who went before that, made that moment possible.
Yeah.
To answer your question, though, yes, he's turning 9. He had a few setbacks, relatively minor setbacks in the subsequent post-transplant process.
Yeah.
But he's basically got a, bespoke Cadillac Escalade immune system that he can now, test drive and take out into the world. Obviously people were asking us, does COVID and the whole thing, mean you have to be extra careful? And the short answer is no. His initial condition wasn't such that it made him susceptible to viruses. But B, his new immune system is perfectly equipped to handle things like that. Of course, COVID is its own thing. There's no, easily acquired antibody for that. But it doesn't affect kids that much, as we know. The tragedy is that it's more on the psychological and social front, right? He spent the first 6 years of his life in some state of quarantine social distancing, whether that was just kind of, keeping apart from other kids or sick kids to actually being in a hermetically sealed transplant unit for 2 months to, all of the above. So to have to go into the garage and get our boxes of gloves and masks and to kind of return to transplant protocol was depressing. I just felt like he was getting cheated out of even more of, his young life.
Yeah. Maybe a little traumatizing too.
Well, yeah. This is, all he ever wanted to do was go to school. And to not have that, and this is very, very widely reported. He and our other daughter, Lydia, and everybody else we know, we basically, and this may be just a failing of us as parents, we basically surrendered them to the screens for the better part of a year.
I've heard there's been a sort of collective regressing, even like psychologically, emotionally, socially, regressing in children, especially.
Yeah. It would be an exaggeration to say they've forgotten how to learn, but but not an obscene exaggeration. It's a procedure that's very social and interactive, and the Socratic method was never meant to be done remotely via Zoom.
Indeed. Well, I hearing all of that and reading the book and I was reminded of how, first of all, what a champ Sebastian is, and I should say it just reminds me of the resilience and wisdom and beauty of children, which is, I think, a perspective that is often forgotten. Like we think of children as like, oh, they've got so much to learn, right? Like very like condescendingly, right? In some ways. But I think like every little creature, Sebastian included, can inspire and be these wise beacons of strength, which he's shown, right? In tremendous ways.
In many ways, yeah. There's varying schools of thought about what childhood is and what it should be, right? A lot of the kind of modern parenting complex, for lack of a less derogatory term, is kind of predicated on the assumption that childhood really is just preparation for adulthood. That it's just training. It's you're on the runway preparing for takeoff, as opposed to perceiving childhood as its own perfect, respectable, and completely valuable phase of life, independent of what comes next.
Yeah.
And I think oftentimes it's the case when kids are tested or challenged in unexpected ways, that you have an opportunity to see some of that. What can we call it? A natural nobility, or a strength, or a wisdom beyond the years, however you want to describe it. And I was just, blown away. In some ways, you could say that, he didn't react to a lot of the inconveniences and setbacks of his medical condition because he never knew anything else, right? He grew up. That was what his normal world was. But there are a lot of things that I've heard about that could have happened that didn't happen with him. For instance, it's not like he's terrified of doctors or injections, like a lot of kids who have medical issues are. It's not that he could have had a lot of, trouble adjusting socially when he did finally go to school. That didn't happen. The one thing that did happen, it was interesting, I'll tell you a little story. He didn't have a lot of friends growing up. He had occasional play dates and stuff, but we didn't have him in a preschool, and most of his friends were his Thomas the Tank Engine train set. But when we came back from transplant, he bonded spontaneously with this kid at the park, and I'm going to change the names, but the kid's name was, we're going to call him Frank, and he completely latched on to Frank. And then Frank moved away, and the next year he started kindergarten. And it just so happened that there was another kid in his kindergarten class named, I'm using the name again, Frank. And he totally bonded with this other Frank because in a certain sense, the word Frank meant friend to him. And he completely latched on to this other kid and, wanted to be his BFF and was somewhat obsessed with him, to the point that the other kid kind of found it a bit of annoying, and the friendship didn't, actually last more than the year. So that was kind of heartbreaking. But aside from that, ultimately he kind of figured it out and, realized that there's other people you can have relationships with and be friends with. So that was just one of those interesting things that you observed. And again, reflects on this very human need for human connection, which is part of what makes us us.
It is, and it's to your point, has been so challenged this past year, right? In a world where hugs are not a thing that exists. When we are like creatures that need that like physical touch. It's been very hard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to pontificate about it, and I don't want to. I'm not an expert. And I give people plenty of space with their COVID attitudes, because in my experience, just as soon as I think this is overdone, I've had people who I know die, so it's real. It's not a hoax, but it is a tragedy, and the constant balance that we all face, no matter what we do, between safety and experience, between risk avoidance and risk tolerance in pursuit of some some fulfilling activity. I just hope we come back. I hope we don't have to reimagine everything in such a way that we accept this, right? Nobody
I
wants
hear
to die
that.
of COVID. It's a grisly death. I grant that. It's to be avoided. But I'll tell you, when literally a year ago, we're in mid-April, when everybody in my neighborhood was literally Clorox wiping every piece of mail and every
Hmm.
grocery thing. In other words, when the protocols were more strict and more over the top than
Yep.
they were in the
Yeah, I
transplant
remember
unit,
that.
yeah, when the protocol was more strict than it was in the bone marrow transplant unit, that's when I kind of think, okay, we're probably going a little too far here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's. I think we've learned that maybe that's not the right approach. Maybe that approach is a little bit too sort of saturated with anxiety and fear. Right? There's been a lot of that. I think I hope that whatever like coming back to is a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more like thinking about how our actions impact others, on a sort of global level, relationally, and a reminder that, like to your point earlier, more value placed in that connection, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah, it's something
because
you can't take for
that has
granted.
been yeah. I mean, there's been a collective grieving for sure. Yeah, yeah. So Miguel, let's well, so for the listeners, Miguel has written this book. We've been sort of talking around it, and it's about his experience with dealing with this chronic disease. His son Sebastian got. I don't know if that's the right word. Has, and it's
It's over now.
beautiful. Had. Thank you. Had. Um, and you should just read it. It's called More Than You Can Handle. I read it. It's available everywhere. Amazon, local bookstores, preferably get them there. Bookshop.org is a great resource.
Absolutely.
It's available there. Go read it. It's wonderful. It'll make you think about what it means to be human. And those are the stories I think help us develop deeper capacity for empathy and compassion. So go read it, pick it up. Miguel, let's talk about empathy heroes. We always kind of wrap up the show talking about the people in our lives, even characters from stories. We mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier. Even characters from stories we love who are sort of empathetic creatures. I'm going to go first to give you a moment to think about your empathy hero.
Great.
My empathy hero this week is the author Morgan Harper Nichols, who someone I follow online. She just deeply profound human that I learn so much from her. And she wrote this week something that I especially like, and it's something I commented on earlier. But it's resonant in the time of a global pandemic. It's resonant in the time of systemic racism and people dying, and just like the thinking of like, what can we do, and how can we contribute, and how can we show up in the world compassionately. She says this, quote, "Empathy. Let me hold the door for you. I may have never walked in your shoes, but I can see your soles are worn. Your strength is torn under the weight of a story I have never lived before. Let me hold the door for you. After all you've walked through, it's the least I can do." So beautifully said. Just a reminder of the, I think, far-reaching capacity for empathy. Sometimes we don't give it credit for. Morgan Harper Nichols is my empathy hero this week. How about you, Miguel?
Well, I would have to say off the top of my head, one of the people who I want to give immense credit to for my progress, such as it is a very well-known, well-recognized meditation teacher named Sharon Salzberg. And she's written wonderful books. She champions a particular kind of meditation, which is centered on loving kindness, known as metta in Sanskrit. That's a Sanskrit word. And it's very simple to practice. It just involves either when you're sitting or even when you're out in the world, just trying to intentionally wish loving kindness on every creature that you see, be it a person or someone who you normally would avoid, or someone who might annoy you, or a dog or whatever. Just try to in a sense, this might be the inappropriate use of the word bless, but I try to think of it just like wish blessings and peace and wellness on everything you see and not ask anything from that. So that has helped me a number of ways. And again, I have to keep saying I need to keep working on this. I'm not where I need to be yet, but I'm definitely better than where I used to be. But there was also, to the degree that I had a single breakthrough that I can point to. One of Sharon Salzberg's talks was where this happened. She gave a talk, and I was in the audience. And after the talk, as is often the case, they opened it up for questions. Okay. And any questions? And I felt my arm raising. And then right when it was about the 30 degree or 40 degree mark, I realized I don't actually have a question. What I'm doing here is I'm reflexively trying to be the best student in the class. I'm trying to show that I get it and that I'm so smart that I could even maybe ask something that challenges the expert. And everybody in the room is going to know that I'm not just one of the students sitting there, but I'm, I belong at the big kids table. And at that very moment, I was able to actually put my hand back down on my thigh and say, actually, no. The best thing you can do here is be silent, listen, try to glean something from what others have to say, and just relate to them without trying to have some sort of informational transaction being the core of the experience. So I try to go back to that place every time I catch myself going into that, kind of jock student mentality that hasn't always served me that well.
Yeah. That's profound. I love that. And Sharon Salzberg is someone I also look up to. She's one I would love on this podcast someday. So Sharon, I know you're listening. If you're listening to this, and I'm just kidding. Miguel, where can the listeners out there connect with you and learn more about your work and obviously order the book and all that stuff?
Thank you for asking. I have a website. I will say this, I've been on Facebook for 10 years, but I'm not like Mr. Social Media presence. I find Twitter can be a very, toxic and dangerous place. So I consume more Twitter posts than I contribute. But I put up a website recently, which is kind of the landing place for the book. It's www.miguelsancho.net. Usually mispronounced and misspelled Sanchez, but in this case, no, it's an O at the end. And check it out. I always feel I need to say this, which is that the book was written by somebody who doesn't finish every book he starts. The book is written by somebody who has a habit of walking out of bad movies. So I felt it very much incumbent upon me to, I feel it's the obligation of the author in the book to get the reader to the end. So the book is not designed to be like an uphill climb the whole way. It's not designed to be, just a plate of uncooked kale, although I like kale. It's supposed to function as a baseline entertainment, activity.
Yeah.
Because I know that people have literally hundreds of thousands of other things they could do with their disposable time. So I wrote it with a very conscious understanding that just because a sentence begins with the word I, it's not necessarily interesting to anybody else. So I tried to make it kind of a fun book at times, and there's attempts at humor that may or may not succeed, but it's not just heavy duty hand wringing and kids suffering.
Yes, 100%, and I agree. And it is entertaining. You were a great writer. And for the listeners, I will just say, like, it's worth getting to the end of this book, because at the end, Miguel, I'll just read what you said at the end. It's okay to be scared. You're not the first person to go through this. Be patient. Focus on what's in front of you. Push forward. Protect your head. Hold on. You can do this. Wonderful wisdom. That's toward the end of the book. Something you've gleaned through the process, and the process is worth looking at, listeners. So I mention books all the time on this show because I'm a reader. I love to read. I think reading is an empathetic practice. So I highly encourage you guys to read more than you can handle. And as Miguel said, it's available everywhere you get your books, and also at miguelsancho.net.
Yes, I think a
Miguel,
Spanish supermodel got miguelsancho.com. So.
Curse
But
that person.
If you confuse me for him, that'll be okay too.
There you go. Well, Miguel, thank you so much for being a part of You Me Empathy.
Absolutely. It was such a great chat. And thank you for doing this podcast. I had an opportunity to sample some of the earlier episodes, and now it's on my regular subscription list. I'm trying to move away from overconsumption of NFL content and more towards this. So this is a step in the direction for me.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here, we're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring, pale blue dot. We have each other. It's You Me Empathy.